So welcome everyone to the Gender Pay Gap Workplace Equity webinar from Women's Health in the South East. We're very happy to have you all here today and thank you for taking time out of your busy days. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Bunurong people, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders here today. I think it's really important, particularly thinking about the gender pay gap and the extra barriers that our First Nations people face to achieve pay equity. And we can see that in the data that I know Margot will be going over as well today. A little bit about WHISE. So Women's Health in the South East is one of 12 primary prevention agencies, women's health services across the state. We have 4 different priority areas. One is around enhancing gender equity by empowering communities and organisations, preventing gender-based violence, improving sexual and reproductive health, and improving women's health and wellbeing. My name is Chrissy Nicholson. I'm the Manager of Gender Equality and Capability, and I'll be facilitating this session for you today with our wonderful guests. My pronouns are she and her. And I would welcome those of you who have just joined to please feel free to add into the chat who you are, who's in the room today. And for anyone who has any questions, we're going to be running through 4 different presentations today. If you can have some questions that you want to, you think about as the time, pop them in the Q&A section, and we'll try and get to as many of those within the panel discussion at the end of this session. In the meantime, we have our WHISE's wonderful CEO, Kit McMahon, that will be answering bits and pieces of those questions throughout the time. And some, if we can't answer them within this forum, we'll certainly endeavour to get back to you when we send the recording around to everyone. The agenda today. So firstly, we're going to be hearing from Margot Paxman, the Manager from the Commission for Gender Equality in the Public Sector, and she'll be going over the pay gap, how it's calculated and why it's important for employers to take action. Then we have 2 of our really wonderful partners here today that will be highlighting the work that they're doing to close the gender pay gap. We have Bridget Nagel from Bayside City Council and Merrin Wheeler from Frankston City Council. We'll then be hearing from our very own Dr. Rachel Bush, who will be talking a bit more about how to evaluate the gender pay gap and what influences it and how we communicate that when we work with partners in our organisation, in other organisations, I should say. And we'll then be moving into the panel discussion. As I mentioned, we are recording this session and we'll be sending you all of the type of questions and the recording afterwards. I know that Fiona will be sending, for those that have just come in and weren't able to press on the link to do the pre-survey, this will be in your chat now or about to become in the chat now. I can't see it right now myself. Just a reminder to keep your mics off and any questions to go into the Q&A section. But it is now time for me to actually pass over to Margot Paxman. Now, as the gender pay gap has been something that since the Gender Equality Act has come out, has been, for me, someone who is very much a people person. As soon as I see all the spreadsheets and numbers and data, I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to even, start to think about this or communicate it and analyse it? And it has been a challenge. We know, we've heard from a lot of our partners, and some of you may be here today. So we really want to use this time to, I guess, demystify, understand a bit more about the gender pay gap. A lot of you have already been analysing and working on your data, but we really want to welcome Margot Paxman from the Commission for Gender Equality in the Public Sector to start this conversation and to hear more about her. So Margot is a manager at the Commission of Gender Equality in the Public Sector. She's been with the Commission since its inception and assisted with the drafting of the Gender Equality Act and its passage through Parliament, which is no small feat. Overall, Margot has worked in gender equality for nearly 9 years and is passionate about the power of systematic change. Welcome, Margot.
Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks so much for that introduction. And yeah, hi from Wurundjeri country also. So bear with me while I do the awkward thing of sharing your screen and setting everything up correctly so I can get my slides on the go. Alrighty.
We can see them, Margot. All good
There
to
we
go.
go. Okie dokie. So let's get going. All right. Let me know as well. I've had this happen before where you share the slides successfully, but then people can't see as you move through them, which is always a fun surprise technical issue. But yes, look, so I have the pleasure of kicking off the conversation in this webinar with a bit of an overview of what even is the gender pay gap, and also to share with you a bit how we talk about it, report it, and what we've found from how we analyse it at the Commission under the auspices of the Gender Equality Act 2020, which, yes, I think has been a great tool to lend structure and energy and indeed legislative obligation to this conversation about the gender pay gap. I'm conscious, though, I imagine not everyone here is part of an organisation with obligations under the Gender Equality Act. So some of what I talk about may be a little bit less relevant to you, but I'm hoping that won't be too much the case. I'm sure also that amongst those tuned in, we have some people who are actual, experts in the pay gap and who have been diving deep into the data for some time. And there's probably people here who don't know so much about what it means at all and everything in between. So hopefully I can share something useful for everyone. But for those who are experts, I will be going back to basics a little bit. So forgive the time I spend on that. So what actually is the gender pay gap? When we're looking at the pay gap in a big picture sense, I like how the Federal Workplace Gender Equality Agency frames it. They say that the gender pay gap is a measure of how we value the contribution of men and women in the workforce. I'm going to use a terrible medical analogy here, so apologies to any medical professionals here today, but you can think of it kind of like the blood pressure reading of the body of gender inequality. A high gender pay gap, just like high blood pressure, might have various causes or risk factors, but it's an indication that something needs to be addressed, something is amiss. To look at the basic maths, though, on the slide, you can see we present in our guidance a bit of a formula of what the gender pay gap is. It's the difference between women's earnings, or people of self-described genders' earnings, and men's earnings, expressed as a percentage of men's earnings. And I'll call out here we're conscious in including self-described gender here, because under the Gender Equality Act, gender equality is inclusively defined. So it is about people of all genders. And so a gender pay gap that is positive, that is greater than 0%, means that men were paid more than women or people of self-described gender. A gender pay gap that is negative or less than 0% means that women or people of self-described gender were paid more than men. But that simplicity of presentation covers up a fair amount of complexity and variables within it, which means really we're not always comparing apples with apples when we talk about the pay gap. There's a lot of things going on under the surface. There's variation, for example, in how you can calculate the average earnings for women, men, or people of self-described gender. Do you use the mean, which is the average value, found by adding all the amounts in a data set and dividing the total by the number of values in the set? Or do you use the median, the middle value, when a data set is ordered from least to greatest? They tell you slightly different things. The mean is more sensitive to outliers. For example, a CEO who receives a significantly larger salary. There's also variation in what's included as earnings. Do you look at just the base salary, or do you consider total remuneration? That is considering things like superannuation, bonus, and overtime as well. And there's variation in who is included in your data set. So are part-time and casual employees included? Is that CEO included in the data set? And I'm saying all of these things because these are all areas where there's variation in what you might see reported by different agencies and reported in the media as well. So at the Commission, we've considered all of this and really gone for a more is more approach. I'm thinking about how those other agencies, like the Workplace Gender Equality Agency and the Victorian Public Sector Commission, who are really the two that are most relevant to us, how they do their calculations. We've aimed for really as much nuance as possible because there are important insights to be gained from comparing, for example, the median gap to the mean gap, or the base salary gap to the total remuneration gap. We also have made the decision to include as many employees as possible in that data set. So that means including that chief executive officer, it means including part-time and casual employees. And for each organisation that's required to report to us, we publish 4 different pay gap measures. That is the mean and the median and the base salary and total remuneration pay gaps for each organisation. So it does have that sense of complexity, but it is good, I think, to be across some of the nuance that goes into the calculation itself. Another really key variable, I think it's useful to think about when sort of trying to demystify what the gender pay gap is the scope of the pay gap and the scope of the data set that you're talking about. And I've attempted to kind of show on the slide a bit of how I think about this. And at the heart of this is a statement that might be familiar to some people here who've been working in this space for a while. Sometimes you hear people say, or in the media, it's illegal to pay people differently for doing the same role. Therefore, the gender pay gap doesn't exist. It can't exist. Pay inequality is already illegal. It can be hard to communicate about what the gender pay gap is and that it does exist, because the term is often used to refer to different things or at different scopes. It can refer to, for example, the broad national or state pay gap that includes obviously a large swathe of employees in various organisations. It can refer to an industry or sector level pay gap that looks at just a specific group of organisations. We can talk about the organisational pay gap, and that's often the frame that we're using under the Gender Equality Act, which takes into account, of course, all the roles in one organisation. Or, and some of you who work in this space within organisation would be more familiar with these, you can use it to refer to a pay gap of a subgroup of roles, such as within a specific division or team or level of an organisation. Or sometimes it can be used to refer to what is unequal pay and is illegal. That is a gap between the pay of people of different genders who are doing the same role or work of equal or comparable value. So these measures, from quite broad at one end to quite specific at the other, are all important and can tell you different things and can help you understand different action that might need to be taken. So I'm not providing all of this detail, I suppose, to try to overwhelm anyone or suggest that every organisation needs to be aware of and analyse every possible version of the pay gap in order to do what's required under the Gender Equality Act or to drive change within your organisation. But I do think it's important to understand what we're talking about and what we're measuring so that we can be clear in how we communicate and consistent in how we're measuring change over time. And that's something we're really focused on, I think, at the Commission. We're conscious of the role we have in monitoring and measuring change over time at that statewide level. Importantly, regardless of the scope of the measure or whether you're talking about the mean or the median or total or base remuneration, gender pay gaps contribute to and are also driven by many other forms of inequality. Again, just like high blood pressure, which might be impacted by diets, rest, exercise, or other factors. There's a lot of things that can go into the gender pay gap and the size of it. Some people here might be familiar with the She's Priceless report from KPMG, the Diversity Council of Australia, and WGEA. They released a second version of it in 2022. And on the slide, I've got just a snapshot of what they found to be the drivers of the gender pay gap across Australia. So they found that really in Australia, conscious and unconscious gender discrimination remains the leading driver of gender pay gaps. And this includes the undervaluation of women's work and bias in recruitment, promotion, and salary decisions. Then the care, family, and workforce participation bucket makes up another large chunk of the pay gap. So that includes things like career breaks, taking time out to have children or for other caring responsibilities, or working part-time. Importantly as well, gender discrimination and stereotype gender norms also influence other significant factors that drive the gender pay gap, such as industrial and occupational segregation, which altogether contributes 24%, as you can see in that light blue segment there. The fact that there are all of these different drivers that contribute to the gender pay gap is why under the Gender Equality Act, we've got the 7 workplace gender equality indicators that address gender inequality. Pay equality is one of those, but addressing the pay gap requires really looking at the data that you're seeing from those other indicators and addressing those, because of course things like opportunities for flexible work at senior levels, discrimination in recruitment and hiring decisions, these are things that organisations can look at that will in turn go some way towards addressing a gender pay gap if that's what you find in your organisation. And the more nuanced you can get in how you're analysing the pay gaps within your organisation, the closer you can get to the specific mix of drivers of those gaps, and the closer you can get to how to address them. And I think we might hear a bit from Rachel about some of that later on. So I'm going to just whiz through quickly some of the data we've received from public sector organisations. So from the 2021 data we reported in our baseline report that we released last year, we found really confirmation that there are gender pay gaps commonly across the public sector. 69% of organisations had a median base salary pay gap in favour of men, and 28% of organisations had that median base salary gender pay gap favouring men by 10% or more. Across the organisation, across the occupational groups represented amongst defined entities, all of those occupational groups had pay gaps in favour of men, and all but one industry group had pay gaps in favour of men. And there were also significant and consistent pay gaps within organisations in a few key industry groups that we found. So these were transport, TAFE and other education, and finance and insurance. I also haven't yet spoken about intersectionality, but I definitely don't want to leave this out of the conversation. So while we're already talking about something that can feel quite complex, it's really important that we also consider intersectionality when looking at the gender pay gap. Because really, if you're just comparing women's pay to men's pay, there can be a further range of inequalities that are masked by that. In our report, Intersectionality at Work, that we released in October this year, we conducted an analysis of estimated pay gaps for a range of cohorts. And on the slide now, you can see a bit of a look at some of the particularly large pay gaps that we found. What we've highlighted here, you can see the groups facing a compounded form of discrimination in addition to gender inequality, compared to the dominant group of men. So as you can see here, for example, we have Indigenous women compared to non-Indigenous men, and the estimated pay gap between those groups was 21%. So groups experiencing compounded gender inequality almost always had the highest pay gaps. But depending on the type of inequality faced and the industry in question, often women still experienced small pay gaps when compared to men facing that same form of disadvantage. For example, men with disability or First Nations men, meaning there was still the gender pay gap playing a role, but it was clear that additional forms of disadvantage or discrimination, for example, those driven by racism, ableism, and ageism, contributed to increasing those gender pay gaps. So this is something that we know a lot of organisations currently may not have the sort of data maturity or data collection to understand this at a really granular level within your organisation, but certainly something that under the Gender Equality Act is a key principle and something that we are hoping that we can all kind of move towards on a journey together to greater understanding and addressing of these forms of inequality. So I'm conscious I'm just about out of time. So I'd like to end just with a quick overview of recommendations relating to pay equity that are contained within our baseline report. So we included in the baseline report some recommendations against each of the indicators that we reported on. And so for pay equity, we included a recommendation to undertake organisation-wide bi-level and like-for-like pay gap analyses at least annually. So this is going beyond what's required in terms of reporting under the Gender Equality Act. To also assess all of the factors identified as legitimate causes of pay variation for potential bias. So where it might be easy to say, oh, there's a pay gap there because of this reason and we can't address that, really taking that moment to consider that critically and think, is there actually something that we can do, or is there something going on under the surface here that can be addressed within our organisation? To invest in the development of workforce and system capability to create links between pay auditing and pay-related practices and decisions. So make sure that you're not just looking at the numbers and leaving it there, but really connecting that through to how pay-related decisions can help address any gaps that you do find. And to invest in data collection systems that allow for more granular analysis, that is, including on an intersectional basis. And so you can see a lot of this is about getting systems and processes more robust. And what we're seeing across organisations is that there's still work to do on this. I'm really excited about the progress reports, the first ones that we'll be receiving next year. And we're going to, hopefully from that, develop greater insights into the strategies and measures across the organisations that report to us that are really working to shift the dial on the gender pay gap. And we're really, really appreciative of all the work that we know is going on right now to prepare those reports. So I look forward to hearing the rest of the webinar, but I will hand back to you, Chrissy. Thanks, everyone.
That big hip up there, but now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Bridget Nagel is the Diversity and Equity Inclusion Lead at Bayside City Council. Over the past 2.5 years, she's been partnering with leaders and staff to create an organisation that's a great place to work, where everyone feels respected and valued. And really, that's what it's all about, isn't it? She's passionate about developing and holding space for meaningful conversations to drive organisational change. It's a pleasure always to partner with Bridget and her team at Bayside City Council, and over to you, Bridget. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chrissy, and hi everyone. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here, so thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this panel, and I'm loving hearing from the other speakers so far as well. Just checking for a thumbs up somewhere. Can you see my slides okay? Excellent. All right, and hopefully we don't lose me halfway through, but we'll see how we go. So hi everyone, as Chrissy said, my name's Bridget Nagel and I'm the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Lead here at Bayside, and my pronouns are she, her. I think that I'd also like to acknowledge the Bunurong people as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands that I'm joining this meeting from today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander community members with us on the call. So, the gender pay gap. I think in many ways I remember feeling like this was one of our more intimidating indicators when we started to review our audit data back in 2021 and to make plans for our gender equality action plan. I remember that when we got this data back, it did feel like an area of concern for us and something that we really wanted to see some change in. But I do think that we were perhaps maybe a little bit unsure about what exactly we could do in this space, as it felt like there were a lot of big systemic kind of societal or cultural factors at play for us at the time. So, for example, at Bayside, we do have a very female-dominated workforce, so around 70% female, 30% male, and then there's a small number of staff as well who self-describe their gender. And in terms of the kind of gender segregation within the workforce, we do also have a lot of staff in our community care team that are female, and I guess it is a traditionally kind of feminized workforce. But at Bayside, we have outsourced our kind of labouring workforce, which would be more of that kind of traditionally masculine workforce, all of which are things obviously we'd be seeking to challenge and change. But I think we were a bit like, oh, with this concentration of women in the workforce in that space and the lack of this kind of other counterbalance, what can we really do in this space? We did also have around 50-50 kind of representation of men and women in leadership roles, and we were maintaining an aspiration around having a 40-40-20 kind of split of representation in our executive team. So 40% female, 40% male, and then 20% male, female, or self-described gender in the role. So I think with these features in mind, we really were I guess, unsure of what we could do in this space beyond monitoring our results and I guess investing in developing a bit of our own capacity and capability in this space. And so recently we've had the pleasure of working with WHISE, who have supported us with some pay gap analysis at the time of this progress report. And it's just been a fantastic capacity building exercise for us in terms of understanding what to look for in our data to help us with our analysis as we continue with this work over the coming years. So that's been really fantastic. I think again, with this context in mind, I guess 2 years ago, where we were feeling a bit uncertain about where to go from here, we did decide that there were some other really critical areas that had come through in our people matter data and our workforce audit that felt like spaces we really wanted to invest in. And so that was kind of where we then decided to focus our attention. So a lot of this was to do with preventing sexual harassment, increasing inclusion for LGBTQIA+ staff. And I think a broader aspiration around wanting to build a bit of awareness and understanding around diversity, equity and inclusion, or the kind of DEI space more broadly, as a bit of a foundation for us to build on as we continue down this road with this work. So I thought I'd share with you just a couple of the key initiatives that we've undertaken in the last 2 years to contribute to some of our progress in this space. So some of these have been developing a standalone sexual harassment policy, which incorporates a really clear zero tolerance message around sexual harassment. And we've extended that into our bullying, harassment and discrimination policies as well. We established an anonymous sexual harassment reporting system where people can go to, I guess, have another avenue to share their experience of sexual harassment in a way that feels safe for them if they're not comfortable to speak to a leader directly or someone in the people and strategy team. We also delivered a DEI Foundations e-learning course to all staff. So that was really about building that kind of foundational awareness of the broader space. And then we worked with leaders to make sure they were embedding those learnings in their teams. We also identified DEI as one of our 3 kind of strategic priorities in our organisational strategy. And so that's been a really useful and valuable tool in terms of having our leaders, so CEO, executive team, senior leaders, kind of regularly referring back to some of our objectives and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve in that space. We provided LGBTQIA+ training to all leaders and to interested staff as well, and also live online and in-person sexual harassment prevention training too. Each year we celebrate around 10 events of significance kind of from a DEI calendar, so ranging from Harmony Day to NAIDOC Week to International Women's Day and more. And really, we try to use these as opportunities to share kind of lived experience stories, so either from staff themselves or external speakers, to really build, I guess, a bit of empathy and awareness and understanding of these different spaces as I guess, a foundation to build on for key initiatives and projects as we roll them out. We've also established a DEI advisory group to help provide input and feedback on our work in this space, as well as some social networks to build that sense of connection for staff with diverse backgrounds and experiences. So at the moment, we have a Pride network, a cultural diversity network, and a neurodiversity network. And these are really staff-driven networks. So there's space to create more, but this is, I guess, where we've started based on staff interest. And then finally, I think another key feature of what we've done in the last 2 years is just engage regularly with senior leaders. So I think we've been really fortunate in that there's been a lot of drive from our leadership team and from our CEO when he saw the data 2 years ago to really want to see some change in this space. And so we meet with them regularly in kind of one-on-one formats, in team meetings, in their regular meetings like manager meetings, executive meetings, etc. And we also just try to communicate regularly with the organisation to keep things front of mind. I did want to share a little bit of our data that's come through, I guess, from 2021 to 2023, just to paint a bit of a picture, I guess, of how investing in some of these initiatives has resulted in some quite significant change. I think what I will want to acknowledge too, though, is that it's fantastic to see improvements, and I think it's really important to reflect on that, to see, I guess, when you invest effort, you see change, and that's a really positive story, but holding as well that some of the data and the results still aren't where we would like them to be. And so, you know, there's still a need to continue to do work in this space as well. So across the board for us, after some of these investments and you know, other things as well, we've seen incidents of sexual harassment drop from 17% in 2021 down to 8% in 2023. We've also seen an increase in staff feeling culturally safe, so around 8% increase, so up to 89%. 77% of staff are indicating that they feel safe to challenge inappropriate behaviour, so increase of 9% there. 87% of staff believe that the organisation takes steps to eliminate bullying, harassment and discrimination. So that's been an increase of 16% since 2021. And 95% of staff feel that the organisation uses inclusive and respectful images and language, so an increase of 11%. I think what has been really valuable about the data this time in terms of the audit and the People Matter survey data and the way that we've been able to analyse that using the tools has been to really dig into some of those more diverse demographic groups and to really understand people's intersectional experiences. And I think using those tools, what we've been able to see as well is some great improvements for staff with diverse identities and experiences. So for women who obviously with our work through the Gender Equality Action Plan have been a focus for us in the last 2 years, we've seen some good improvements. So 91% of women are now indicating they feel culturally safe at work, so an increase of 11% since 2021. 76% of women are feeling safe to challenge inappropriate behaviour, so up by kind of 13%. 87% of women feel that the organisation takes steps to eliminate bullying, harassment and discrimination, so up by 16%. We've also seen some significant decreases in the incidence of bullying, harassment and discrimination, so down by kind of 18, 17 and 10% respectively. Then for some other staff groups, so LGBTQIA+ inclusion has been a big space for us, and it's been really good to see some shifts in that space too. So 81% of LGBT staff indicating they feel culturally safe at work, so increase kind of 24% there. And also 73% indicating that they feel safe to challenge inappropriate behaviour, so up kind of 21%. And similarly for staff with a disability, which I think by looking at our data again this year will be a key focus for us in the next couple of years and onwards. We've seen some really big jumps. So 77% of staff reporting feeling culturally safe at work. Obviously, we want to see that go up more, but it has come up by 27%. And then similarly, feeling safe to challenge inappropriate behaviour up by 43%, so to 73%. And feeling that the organisation takes steps to eliminate bullying, harassment and discrimination, so increase of 47% there. So you can really see that they were kind of our key metrics that really had the biggest change. And I think that they're really connected to that level of leadership engagement and sponsorship in the space, but also some of those initiatives that we implemented, like the changes in our policy and reporting platforms, etc. So in terms of how this has impacted on our gender pay gap, I was kind of curious to see what the data would come back at this year. And it was really pleasing to see that we have seen a change in our mean total remuneration pay gap. So from 9.4% in 2021 to 5.4%. And I think, apologies, I didn't include the median, but I think it's kind of from 9 something to 7 something for the median. I think some of the likely contributing factors for why the gender pay gap still remains for us at council is that we do still have that kind of female dominated workforce, and a lot of women here are typically in kind of part-time roles. We also have some less positive perceptions around kind of promotional opportunities and opportunities to progress or develop in the organisation. So that's an area that we really need to focus on addressing. And also, I think, acknowledging as well that people with diverse identities and experiences aren't necessarily having the same positive experience as other Bayside employees or the kind of average employee based on our data. And so there's a need to address some of that too. Other likely factors I think that could have contributed to this improvement in our pay gap beyond what we've kind of looked at already would be an increased uptake by men of parental leave, roughly equal proportions of men and women accessing carers leave, an increase in gender diversity in some of our kind of occupation groups like the community care space, but also in our leadership teams, and also lowered rates of harassment, kind of meaning people might be staying on longer or they're not as distracted or impacted in their day-to-day work, and so they have the opportunity to really be engaged with their work and to take on new challenges and those sorts of things. So I guess some key takeaways from this process, which feel quite broad, perhaps, has really been around reflecting on the importance of having those kind of strong and trusting relationships with our senior leaders. And I think taking the time and having the opportunity to invest in those has really meant we've been able to get some fantastic sponsorship from them in this space. And I think that just changes people's perception of how serious we are about the work and how much of a priority it is for us as an organisation. And similarly, I think taking a structured kind of change management approach throughout has been really critical. So at Bayside, we use ADCAR as our kind of change framework, but we really always try to make sure we're investing in building our leaders' awareness, understanding, kind of knowledge in this space first, and then really supporting and equipping them to sponsor the work that we're undertaking in this space with their teams, so that there are many change agents out in the organisation working in this space, and it's not just one team or one person seen to be kind of leading it, but it's got more of that collective piece in there. So where to from here, which I imagine we might talk about a bit more in the panel, but I think for us, the reflection at this point, kind of around the progress audit time, has been that, we still have some actions in our gender equality action plan that we want to see through to kind of 2025. But I imagine that going forward for us as an organisation, we'll really be digging into that intersectional data and thinking about how can we be quite strategic about the specific sorts of actions that we're wanting to take to make sure we're being targeted in our approaches to address any inequality that might exist in this space, rather than kind of broader initiatives. All right, I think I might leave it there. So Chrissy, I'll try and figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you so much, Bridget. One, for sharing your data and insights and actually such incredible shifts in your gender pay gap, and just showing, I guess, the diversity of the initiatives that you took to achieve that. Everything from that systems and structures and policies right through to training, capacity building, and absolutely that need of leaders driving the way. I also, think that importance of lived experience and the more, I guess, those grassroots initiatives that you highlighted of staff organising where the energy is. And so, just seeing that, I guess that grassroots through to the systems and structures in a change management framework has been really great to see, and I guess does address some of those nuances and those some of those potentially hidden drivers that are apparent. So thank you so much. for
Pleasure.
your wonderful
Thank you.
presentation. I look forward to introducing Merryn Wheeler. Merryn is a purpose-driven health promotion practitioner focused on amplifying social impact through her work as Gender Equality Advisor at Frankston City Council. Merryn has spent more than a decade working with corporate and for-purpose organisations to improve capability, to innovate and test solutions to generate impact. With a passion for gender equality, collective action and sustainable impact, she combines an optimistic drive and a pragmatic approach with her professional expertise to contribute to progressing equality. Over to you, Merryn. And you'll just need to take yourself on mute. Off mute, there you go, thank you.
Hopefully you can all see that.
We definitely need those mute cards, you're on mute mugs. We all need those mugs to just hold up and take a drink of them when that happens. All right, thanks, Merryn.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I too would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that warm welcome to all First Nations people who are joining us today. Thank you to the Commission and WHISE for inviting me to speak about Frankston City Council's journey in progressing the gender equality and closing the pay gap. When I first arrived at Frankston City Council, it felt like I was arriving a little late. Our Jeep had been approved in March, but we were technically in the second year of our plan and we had 70 plus actions. That seemed a little bit overwhelming for multiple reasons. Including that I was new to local government and I was returning to work after a couple of years of full-time parenting. So, once I practiced a little bit of breath work, I felt like I could start to identify a starting point and make sure I knew what those first few steps would be. I really needed to get a lay of the land initially, an understanding of the organisation's previous work, its culture and its readiness for change. And after a couple of weeks of informal consultation and desktop research, I was able to gain some insights and get a lay of the land, and it looked a little like this. It was a little barren with some big mountains ahead, but glimpses of blue skies. And as an optimist, those blue skies are what gave that hope and spurred the work along. In terms of the highlights from that assessment, it showed that there was organisational drive and want for this change. There were pockets of support that existed, and there were areas of the organisation with advanced knowledge and understanding. And the lowlights of the assessment revealed there were areas of the business that had never considered gender equality within their work. People were time poor, and this was adding more to their workload from their perspective. And being vulnerable in the workplace was really new and for some people quite foreign. So these insights combined with the data and the learnings from our previous workplace gender audit provided a starting point. In preparing to start, I mapped a theory of change, noting where areas of the business were in the change process, and then I was able to review our Jeep and consider the timing of the actions that we had planned. One thing we know about humans is we don't like change, but we become more open to change when we're more informed, and the more confident we are in knowing how to make that change, the more likely we are to act. So the review resulted in a revision of the timing of some of our actions, with greater priority placed on actions that contributed to creating an environment for change and forming strong foundations. We took a multi-pronged approach with the actions identified where they could simultaneously reinforce each other and reach different staff. And the initial focus for the work was creating a workplace culture that reinforced behaviours that progress gender equality, contributing to an environment for change. If people are using inclusive language every day, they're demonstrating respect, for example, using people's pronouns, and they are reporting sexual harassment, then we can start to build a strong base for the expected behaviours within our workplace. Council has a hierarchical model, and our leadership team act as pillars, carrying much of the load and providing stability and guidance, but they also act as levers, and they can trigger change. We started with developing our leaders' knowledge and capability, gaining their buy-in and building their confidence to be change champions. Understanding reflective practice is required to enable transformational change. The leadership training program was designed to incorporate 3 webinars followed by a small group coaching session that would be delivered across a 6-month period. The webinars were delivered multiple times over different weeks, days, times to capture as many leaders as possible, and we recorded the webinars too to ensure that no one was left out. The content touched on the legislation, gender and sexuality, inclusive language, gender equality, the global and local context, transformational change, sexual harassment and family violence, and incorporated practical actions leaders could take to progress gender equality. A couple of months post the webinars, we delivered the coaching sessions. And these provided an opportunity for reflection on the learnings, to clarify and or question components of the training, and work to develop a goal that they could act on. Providing this dedicated space for leaders to reflect on the webinars and identify how they can lead change was a really important component of this model. It gained significant buy-in from leaders, and leaders reflected that the coaching sessions demonstrated council's commitment, placed importance on this work, and authorised their role to prioritise and lead the change. The highlights from this approach include gaining incredible buy-in from the leadership group, and it also demonstrated that leaders understood what the actions were that they could take to impact the relevant gender equality indicators. The impact on cultural change was felt and seen. I received several emails from a number of different leaders outlining their appreciation, but also outlining those aha moments for them, which was, really warming and beneficial. And it was also recognised that gender equality was starting to appear in conversations across council. Outsourcing the facilitation of the training also was incredibly helpful in terms of providing greater capacity for other work to progress. So if you can, I'd definitely recommend this. WHISE were incredible, and they were also able to evaluate, in the evaluation, calculate the social impact value of the training program, which is incredibly useful in demonstrating the benefit in terms of the value of the investment. And the net benefit of that program was over $900,000 or over $7,000 per participant, which is, an incredible return. The learnings from the program were not new, but they included participation did drop off, but having the webinars recorded did help. And tailoring the content level to a group with varied knowledge is really challenging, but the coaching session supported meeting staff where they were at, providing deeper dives into the topic and delivering practical application of this information. During the 6-month rollout of the training, I also gained invitations to team meetings and was able to deliver similar education to their staff, supporting those leaders to open conversations with their teams. The most significant outcome from this presentation through team meetings was that sexual harassment reports started to come in. Previously, we hadn't received any reports, despite our People Matter survey revealing that sexual harassment was being experienced by some staff. During this period, we also celebrated International Women's Day and focused the sessions on the power of inclusive language to further reinforce the desired workplace culture and introduce this notion to our community. In the background, we were also working toward implementing guidelines for the use of pronouns in the workplace, contributing to the gendered workforce segregation indicator. And through gender equality training to leaders and staff, we introduced the difference between gender and sexuality and the importance of inclusive language, but we also needed to build upon this. So we did deliver LGBTIQA+ inclusion training to staff through various mediums before we launched our guidelines and IT capability to add pronouns to staff profiles. With all of this work, psychological safety was paramount to progressing change and allowing vulnerability to happen in our workplace safely. As I mentioned, we took a multi-pronged approach to engaging people in the work, and this included respecting where parts of the organisation were in their change journey and also recognising their readiness for change. We worked with WHISE and the Jesuit Social Services Men's Project to deliver a conversational session with our operations team, who are predominantly men, with the aim to start a dialogue around gender equality among staff. And whilst we encountered some various levels of resistance, we planted a seed for some. We ignited reflections on societal changes related to gender roles, and staff openly discussed current gendered expectations for the first time. And the things that we learned from this was the sessions created space for these conversations in the workplace and led to conversations continuing beyond the session into the workplace, and that staff were open to more of these conversations in the future. But our work has gone beyond the individual and organisational cultural level, with efforts made at a structural level. We continue to honour that change takes time, but we recognise we need to create systemic changes that support the cultural shifts to progress pay parity. Through leadership training program, leaders were educated about the results of our first workplace gender audit and priority areas for action. And they were encouraged to take action on quick wins that would help progress gender equality indicators, such as promoting parental leave to expecting fathers, reviewing appointment of higher duties and secondments within their team, using inclusive language, and encouraging flexible work arrangements within their team. And we've seen positive changes in our current workplace gender audit, with results showing that there's been more equal distribution of higher duties and secondments across genders, and more appointments were awarded to non-full-time workers, both contributing to recruitment and promotion indicator progress. And our audit findings also showed that men took longer periods of parental leave, which is a slight progress related to the availability and utilisation of leave and flexibility indicator. In advancing our work further, Frankston City Council introduced greater accountability of managers to progress gender equality. Initially, we had planned to include a statement within job descriptions, but when we investigated this approach further, we identified that this was highly resource intensive and the impact was going to be quite low, as job descriptions are only reviewed annually, unlike performance plans. So instead, we implemented a gender equality goal for managers within their performance management templates, and it included 7 KPIs. Those KPIs included participating and completing GE training, understanding pay parity within their team and rectifying, creating opportunities for part-time workers to access higher duties and secondments, promoting supports and benefits to staff, including flexible work arrangements, paid and unpaid leave and family violence leave, promoting reporting of bullying, harassment and sexual discrimination and sexual harassment, use of inclusive language in all communications, and ensuring gender impact assessments were being completed in all relevant areas. Further to this change, we also introduced a tick box into all staff performance plans to ensure that flexible work arrangements were being discussed through performance review cycles. Council have a strong support structure for flexible work arrangements, and we know that many staff have informal flexible work arrangements that's situational, and the nature of these arrangements work for many staff. So for example, we find that staff might start later or finish early, they might work from home or change their hours or days to manage those care responsibilities at different times throughout the year. And whilst we support this level of ease and flexibility, we know that we need to monitor usage to ensure that all areas of the business are having these conversations and that all staff are supported. Within our recent EBA review that has successfully been adopted, we extended Council's work hours from 6 AM to 6 PM to 6 AM to 10 PM, providing greater flexibility to staff who require it. And we introduced a right to disconnect inclusion as well to ensure staff are empowered to finish work with no expectation to be available after work hours or on non-work days. We successfully doubled our secondary carers leave from 15 to 30 days. We introduced prenatal leave available for those who are pregnant or expecting a child, undertaking IVF or adopting, and that includes a secondary carer. We also introduced miscarriage leave, which is also beneficial for the secondary carer. And we've also introduced 5 days of gender affirmation leave. We anticipate that these advancements will continue to contribute to our progress in the availability and utilisation of leave and flexibility indicator in future, and also contribute to our pay gap. As part of structural changes and in line with our annual review period, Council focused on reviewing pay differences within our executive leadership and senior management teams, with improvements made, and this has greatly contributed to our progress in the gender pay equity indicator. But it doesn't stop there. The ongoing focus is about looking at the banded positions now, where the pay structure is balanced, but the type of roles classifications such as full-time, part-time and casual continue to require a gender lens. So we have a plan and we continue its achievement alongside monitoring and assessing levels of readiness for change, as well as being guided by up-to-date data so that we can continue to successfully engage staff in this work and move forward in our journey. The ability to stimulate change at a systemic, organisational and individual level is progressing Council's gender equality journey, and in particular pay parity. In our recent workplace gender audit, we saw significant progress. Our mean or average pay gap for total remuneration has decreased from 3.4% to 0%. And when we consider our median pay gap for total remuneration, it has also improved, reducing from -3.1% to -2.9%, and continuing to favour women, which we know, or we assume, is influenced by the gender composition of our workforce. And whilst we're proud of this progress, we also recognise this result doesn't reveal the whole picture. And when we consider our workforce proportions, 2/3 women, 1/3 men, and calculate a weighted average pay gap, we also revealed a pay gap that benefits men. And when we compare this to 2021, we still see an improvement, a 3.8% reduction in total remuneration, which indicates and further confirms that we are making progress in the gender pay equity indicator. Along with monitoring our progress against gender equality indicators, we also watch for other signals of progress, such as shifts in engagement in training. And recently we just ran our bystander intervention training as part of 16 days of activism. And aside from having a really high attendance rate, we also had a number of, and I could say with clarity, about 7 to 10 staff members who participated, who emailed me saying that that session should be mandatory. So even that drive is coming from our workforce now, which is great to see. Frankston City Council has only begun its journey to progress gender equality, and we still have more to build and sustain. But when we stop and reflect on our 2 audits and the outputs and the outcomes, we see evolvement. The knowledge gained along the way critically informs future action, and we have appreciated the conversations and collaborations with other councils, public entities, and endorsed gender equality providers. Learnings gained through this process that will continue to inform include keep recording training where possible. It not only benefits those who are unable to attend, but it also supports people who like to engage in learning when they're ready, and also new employees. Be prepared for resistance and seek opportunities to include or call people in. Sometimes you need to create your own traction to start the momentum, so create some quick wins and increase the visibility through engaging organisational champions. Take a multi-pronged approach where the efforts reinforce each other and advance multiple actions. Take a moment to recognise you are doing social change work and acknowledge the many uncontrollable variables, but remember each step forward contributes to change. So what does our landscape look like now? I feel like the landscape isn't as barren. There are signs of life and growth. We've climbed some hills, but there are definitely still some mountains ahead, and the bits of blue skies continue to provide hope. Hopefully that also gives you all a little bit of support along the way. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Marion. Wow, so much that's been going on in your organisation, led by you, but as you say, you know, really is being taken up by other other people within the organisations. And I think this is something that's really wonderful about the Gender Equality Act and having to report in. It means it goes beyond us as gender equality practitioners and does truly make it everyone's business. I really loved how you brought vulnerability into that conversation, and, you know, that this is a conversation that can be uncomfortable and you do need to be vulnerable in the workplace, and how that can actually, you know, be strengthened. And, you know, and another analogy on top of yours, Margot, in regards to blood pressure, I think that building analogy and creating those strong foundations are going to put us in good stead for those blue skies and green pastures. So thank you so much. Marion, I'd now like to introduce a woman who has a self-professed data nerd and who has helped me on my journey to become less scared of the gender pay gap and embrace it and really understand all the different nuances and those hidden drivers that I'm so passionate about that are beyond numbers that do slightly scare me. Dr. Rachel Bush is the Evidence and Policy Lead at WHISE. Rachel's research background reflects her keen interest in increasing equitable access to healthcare for women and people from marginalised groups. Part of Rachel's role at WHISE involves supporting defined entities to evaluate their workplace data and identifying the areas that require further attention to continue to close their gender pay gap. Rachel will be drawing upon those learnings from this work in her presentation today. Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thank you, Chrissy. I'm going to figure out this whole screen sharing business. And that says that's screen one. Okay. I'm hoping that you can all see the presentation. Beautiful. So thank you everybody for joining us here today, and for your patience with technology being technology. I would just like to first acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people and would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. For the sake of time and so that we can try and hear from the panel with a Q&A session, I'm going to maybe briskly move my way through this. So you can see what I'm going to be covering off here. Chrissy mentioned what I do at WHISE, part of my role, which is supporting defined entities. And lately that's been about helping them to understand their pay gap and what's feeding into it and what's closing it. So I'm going to be touching a little bit on some stuff that's going to help you with evaluating your own workplace's pay gap. And as well how to bring others on board, because this really is everybody's business. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about intersectionality. Each of our panelists today have been talking about the importance of intersectionality. So I'm going to provide a bit of a definition for those who aren't very clear on what this means. I'm going to talk a bit through why this matters for your pay gap, and a bit about how to actually apply an intersectional lens to your pay gap. So intersectionality recognises that people's lives are shaped by their identities, their relationships and social factors. So these all combine to create intersecting forms of privilege and oppression depending on a person's context and the existing power structures such as patriarchy, ableism, colonialism, homophobia, racism, and more. So the wheel of power and privilege, which is up on my slide here, really demonstrates this so clearly. So you can see in the middle the factors that hold the most social currency, things like being a citizen, being white, slim, owning your own property. And then the outside of the wheel has those factors that are more frequently marginalized. So being homeless, being in a larger body, having dark skin color, being undocumented. So it's intersectionality is really about looking at power and privilege or oppression, disadvantage. So we need to apply an intersectional lens when we evaluate workplaces and their pay gaps to determine who is furthest behind and most excluded, so we can work to reach them first. And doing this will not only support more substantive equality, but also lead to more inclusive, responsive and sustainable policies and structures within your workplace. So how are we doing this? So it's about, as the previous speakers have already touched on, we want to look at your data not only by gender, but also these other important identities and experiences. And I've got just some of these up on the slide. So whether someone has a disability, whether they identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, are they from diverse cultural or faith backgrounds, from LGBTIQ plus communities. So what is your HR payroll data telling you? And that's all the information that you populate that reporting template with for the Commission. And then how do perceptions and experiences differ in the People Matters survey? So looking at the experiences for people of different genders, but also looking in at people with disability versus people without disability, people born in Australia or not born in Australia. You get the picture. I will note here, though, that the ability to evaluate the data by these different identities and experiences is still very binary. So if we're looking at People Matters survey, for example, that demographic export into Excel, we're only able to look in at whether or not people have this identity or not, or this experience or not. We're not yet able to capture how these experiences overlap and intersect, or at least not within the export that I gain access to. So we're unable to see what is the experience of someone with disability who was not born in Australia and has a diverse faith background. However, you can dig deeper through the use of focus groups and conversations with your team to learn about the experiences of different people in your workplace. And look, these conversations are so important anyway, because we aren't just all numbers, and you do get more rich understanding through having those conversations. Also a note that intersectionality isn't just about how we evaluate our data or the data that we evaluate, but also how we're collecting that data. So what questions are we asking, and what are the methods that we're collecting that data? And who's doing the analysis? We all have our different experiences, and we bring that lens and that unconscious bias to everything that we do and how we perceive the world. So it's really important to make sure that as you evaluate your gender pay gap and those different factors influencing it, and you pull together your report, it's really great to get someone else to look that over who might go, I don't know if that's what this means. And so it just reduces that unconscious bias. Telling a story with your data. This is really important for inviting others along on this whole journey. It provides a much bigger picture through more meaningful communication. So some of us really thrive looking at charts and statistics. As Chrissy said, I'm a bit of a data nerd and I enjoy looking at spreadsheets. I'm strange. For others, it can make you feel a bit nauseous and a bit cross-eyed and not really understand, you know, so 75% of women and 90% of men and 80% of people with diverse gender identities agree that the work is allocated fairly regardless of gender. But what does this actually mean for my gender pay gap? You want to take that guesswork out. So let's firstly look in what has changed since the first reporting period back in 2021, or whenever you last collected data. And do this for each of those 7 workplace gender equality indicators. So, well, 6, because one of them is about pay equity. So look at what has changed, and then see where these changes can be linked back to the strategies and measures in your gender equality action plan. So I'll give you a for instance. Have you noticed that there is a reduction in workplace sexual harassment in the People Matters survey data? Have you noticed there were more official complaints of sexual harassment recorded in your HR records? Look at your gender equality action plan and see how you plan to tackle indicator 4, workplace sexual harassment. Did you perhaps run some training sessions? Because here you could perhaps tell the story to your leadership and executive team that after running a series of training sessions, people are more aware of how to submit an official complaint and perhaps also feel safer and more supported to do so, as there were more official complaints since the first reporting period. You might also be able to say the training also increased understanding of what constitutes sexual harassment, as there were smaller proportions of people who experienced sexual harassment in the workplace according to the People Matters survey data. So that might be that people now understand that the way they were behaving was actually really inappropriate, and so they may have changed their behaviours. So telling a story like this is more tangible than charts and numbers, and it will talk, and you can link that back to, and how does this impact on the pay gap? So then finally, you want to tell this story within each indicator and highlight progress as well as the things that require further attention, because you know, it's about the things that are closing the pay gap as well as keeping it open. So just almost finally, so I've had some key learnings or some things that have stood out along the way as I've worked with some defined entities. So firstly, reducing your pay gap really is an organisation-wide responsibility. It is everybody's business. So we want our executive and leadership teams to lead from the top and back those changes and initiatives. But we also need people right down to the most junior within a workplace and amongst our work groups making changes. Work needs to be allocated fairly. There needs to be safe and inclusive workplace cultures, free of sexual harassment and discrimination. And we want people to feel like they can succeed and grow their career within the organisation. Reducing your pay gap may feel insurmountable, as I think our previous panelists have certainly spoken about, but each change you make really will move the dial and have a flow-on effect. Unconscious bias, it's really important to uncover this, and this does link back to why it's important to apply an intersectional lens to your evaluation. It really does hold back progress and can impact the diversity of your workplace, perhaps through recruitment and promotion processes, and lead through to a large source of staff dissatisfaction. So working to uncover that unconscious bias will have a big impact on your progress. And finally, just remember that the pay gap figure is an indicator. It's an indicator of how you're progressing, particularly through those other workplace gender equality indicators. And here, it's important to also notice or remind yourself that even if you're noticing your pay gap reducing, that you do still need to dive on in and examine those intersectional experiences, as Margot highlighted earlier, through the different pay gaps for people who are Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, culturally and racially marginalised, etc., etc. We saw just how big those pay gaps are. So do continue to look at how can we keep improving our workplace. So finally, WHISE has developed a guide to support you with evaluating your gender pay gap. I do want to acknowledge that the Commission already has some great guides and tools available, but the point of difference here is that it is really step by step. We dive into each indicator. We link back to the Commission's definition for what each indicator is and why it's important to collect this data. We then provide some examples of how this each indicator can influence or impact the pay gap. So why it matters to look at that pay gap, that data for your pay gap. And then specifically within the Workplace Gender Audit Reporting Template and within the People Matters survey, which data to be looking at for that indicator and how to look at it and why. And then, of course, you can always reach out to us at WHISE and we can support you with diving into that data and support you with communicating these findings to your executive teams, because sometimes that can feel a little bit daunting. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, everybody. And I'm going to hand back to Chrissy.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, I think that importance of in the intersectional lens is so important, and I think that's come across clearly in each of the presentations in some way. Now we are, because of our tech issues, we're a bit behind time. So I'm hoping we're going to start a panel discussion now. If anyone's got any questions for either specific panel members or for the group, please pop it in the Q&A and we'll endeavour to get to them. We will be going over time a little. For those of you who have to leave and go on time, that's fine. We'll be sending you a recording so you can have a listen afterwards. And we will go from there. For those that do need to leave, thank you. But we'll continue with the panel discussion. And again, thank you to Bridget, Maren, Margot and Rachel for your insights today. Okay, I've got a question from Sue Ellen Gillies. So this is a question for Bridget. What top 3 initiatives do you think drove such substantial increases?
It's a good question, Sue Ellen. I think probably one isn't really an initiative, but I think that the leadership sponsorship is definitely like the biggest thing. And so I'd say just that consistent communication from our leaders about the kind of why for the work and the importance, and then just showing up to that. So what that might look like is when we host an event, we have either the CEO or a member of the executive team introduce it and set the context for why we're all there and the significance of the date or the event, and to just, I guess, provide that kind of importance and sponsorship. So that would be one. I think the DEI Foundation's e-learning was really valuable because it provided just a foundational understanding for all of us at council, and especially for new starters. We got really great feedback from them about coming into the organisation and feeling like they had real clarity on our values in this space. And as far as the sexual harassment piece goes, it's hard to pick one, but I would say it is probably the combination of the learning and the policy change, just because of the level of communication around our zero tolerance kind of approach at that time. So I think that would have led to the shift there.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point around, induction, because you may deliver initiatives, but as new staff come, that memory goes. So that importance of keeping up those initiatives and keeping that momentum going. Great question, Sue. I'm just checking in with maybe some of the other panelists. Maren, what would be your top initiative, would you say, that has helped to close your pay gap?
I think ultimately it probably would have been the review that we did of our executive leadership team and senior management team. Doing that analysis and looking at where we could make shifts and changes probably had the greatest impact. But I think also one of the other pieces of data that came out from our audit was that we actually saw a shift in the number of women that were employed casually and employed full time. So since 2021, we've actually seen an increase in the number of women working full time and a decrease in the number of women working casually. So I think that also would have contributed.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously provide the workplace to enable that to happen. I've got another question from Sue Ellen. Thank you. And this is at this time for Margot and Rachel. So what's the most meaningful data for communicating the gender pay gap? The mean or the median, base salary or total remuneration? That's a big question that we hear a lot. So I'm going to invite Margot to answer that first, and then I'll go to Rachel.
Thanks, Chrissy, and thanks for that question, Sue Ellen. Yes, it's a really good one, a really interesting one. And yes, I was saying, you can understand all of these nuances and variations, but when it comes to communication and it comes to monitoring and consistent reporting, consistency and sort of regularity, I think, is really important. I would say it does depend what's most meaningful for your communication, particularly internally within your organization, and to the leaders that you're seeking that sponsorship and sort of champion role from. It will depend a bit on the nature of your sort of organizational structure and the pay distribution. I certainly would lean, in terms of base salary and total remuneration, towards, if you can, incorporating total remuneration, because that can tell a fuller picture of remuneration, particularly in organisations that do see more of that use of additional benefits. For example, if there are a lot of employees working overtime hours, and that may have a gendered sort of impact. With regard to mean and median, That's an interesting one. I don't think there's a right answer here from my perspective. As I said, mean is more sensitive to outlier salaries. And so it may, if you do have highly paid executives or perhaps lower paid staff at the other end of the scale, it can help capture the scale of that using the mean, and that can be useful for communication. But in terms of where the bulk of perhaps the work to shift the dial might be, the median can be a bit more of a sort of moderated, less sort of pulled in one direction or the other. So that's not a clear answer for you, Sue Ellen. I think look at the data, compare all of those measures if you can, and really, again, just consistency of communication. Pick that measure, be clear about what you're talking about and consistent about what you're using, I think is the main thing. But Rachel might have other insights to add.
Yeah, thanks, Margot. So similar to you, I think my preference is total remuneration. I think you just get a more rounded picture because you're going to have some employees who have those extra benefits, and then maybe those more like casual employees aren't going to get those same benefits. So I think it really does show you that gap within your workforce. In terms of mean and median, I'm a little bit of a data piggy, so I enjoy it all. I like gobble it all up because I want to get a full picture of what's going on. Mean, as you mentioned, it is sensitive to outliers. And because the pay gap is calculated with the CEO in there, as well it should be, because they are also part of your workforce. Even though that can draw that mean up, it also lets you know, is your CEO perhaps super like highly paid compared to the most junior? So I know that there are some workplaces that have like a capped sort of ratio of what the CEO can earn in comparison to the lowest paid employee. So, I mean, imagine the pay gap if we did this on like Disney. That mean figure would be very, very telling. Median can give you a picture of your typical employee's experience and look at where what is going on for, say, the bulk of your workforce. So they both tell a different story and both are important to look at. And yeah, again, I'm echo Margot. I'm sorry that I couldn't give a more definitive, but hopefully it'll give you an understanding of why each pay gap figure is meaningful.
Thank you so much, Margot and Rachel. Any other questions from participants, please pop it in the chat. There's a question I have that we see a lot of our partners struggle with a lot, and it has been mentioned in regards to the importance of intersectionality. And particularly, in some cases that, you may close the gender pay gap, but then if you look more closely at through an intersectional lens, you still see inequity there that moves beyond gender, as in addition to gender. And I feel like a lot of people that we speak to struggle with the how, like what actually can we actually practically do. So I'd like to open the floor of anyone who'd be interested in letting us know any examples of how to practically apply that intersectional lens when analysing the gender pay gap and the, I guess, as drivers that contribute to it. Anyone can put their hand up.
I'll start off
Right.
on that with the kind of I suppose, lofty forward-looking goal, which is how to do it. The best way to do it is to increase the sophistication of data collection and over time to actually be able to disaggregate the data, as Rachel was talking about, in a way that provides the real numbers in the same way that you might currently be able to do that on the basis of gender. But acknowledging that is it's not an easy thing to do. It requires investment, and it also requires a level of cultural safety and confidence within organizations. You're not going to be able to, even if you have the best system in the world, get it complete with data if staff within your organization don't feel, one, like they're safe to actually disclose, and two, like the organization is going to make meaningful change on the basis of what that data says. So yeah, I think that's the main thing that I'd say, but acknowledge it's not an easy task, and it's a long-term kind of journey for a lot of organizations and for us at the Commission as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, you know, it's strengthening the data segregation and how we create cultural safety to enable people to feel safe to even, you know, input that data. Yep, thanks, Margot. Rachel, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. And yeah, echoing what Margot said, and I guess at the moment we don't quite have the sophistication within our analysis abilities, but I guess until then it's understanding that, well, we know each of the indicators influences the pay gap. So looking in and going, well, what's the diversity of our workplace? And then what does it look like? What proportion of employees with diverse experiences and identities are sitting up in those senior executive positions? How are they perceiving their ability to grow their career within this organization? What's going on with leave and flexible working arrangements and organizational segregation? So all of these indicators, while we can't yet do a more sophisticated analysis, we can still look in at the data and see, well, what are these experiences and what are we actually seeing within the HR payroll data? And then, as I discussed earlier, having focus group conversations, because as we break down these barriers and improve the experiences of each employee, you will start to see that that pay gap reduce. I'll hand over to Merrin.
Thanks, Rachel. I was just going to talk from our lens, and at the moment we really don't have a sophisticated system. We're in the process of evolving ours and introducing a new system, but something that we've been talking about is the importance of building that trust with our workforce. That's really been the priority for our staff, to know that whatever information they're providing to us is meaningful, is being used in the appropriate way, is actually contributing to change. And so whilst we've had a bit of a delay in our system being updated, we've used that time to sort of foster that trust with our workforce, and I guess start conversations with them so that they understand when we come out to them and ask them for that information, that they'll feel informed as to why that information is important, and might be more willing to actually disclose and share some of that information for the greater good.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Trust is so important and sometimes intangible, but there is, you know, looking at different ways to build trust is so important. Bridget.
I think just building on what everyone else has said, I feel like for us, a core part of communicating the why for people to share that data will be about connecting the data that we had at the time, how we use that to determine our actions, and then how that's contributed to the results that we've seen. And so I guess just articulating that, you know, by sharing that information, it does provide us with the opportunity to better understand what it is that people are experiencing at work, and then to take some really tailored approaches there. So I think just echoing what everyone else has said.
Okay, thank you. We hope to have an intersectionality in practice forum in the new year. So watch this space on that one to really get some practical examples of what people are doing to address this. Got another great question from Helen Kelleher about managing backlash resistance. The question is, have you experienced backlash and resistance in this work? And if so, what have you done about it? See lots of smiles coming up.
I can start this one.
Go for it, Marion.
I think we can't not experience backlash and resistance in this work. It's social change work, and we expect to receive this, and it would be, yeah, we wouldn't be able to do this work without that. Part of that resistance is a positive shift. It means that people are actually engaging in the work. It gives us an opening to have some dialogue and question or be curious about their viewpoints or their arguments. And it also gives us insight in terms of where we need to direct our messaging and how we need to direct our future work to certain cohorts within our workplace. So I think that's really important. One thing that we've done is actually roll out by backlash and resistance training. So WHISE have actually come into our organisation in this second half of this year, and they'll be coming back at the start of next year to try and capture as many staff as possible through in-person backlash and resistance training to manage that. And that's because I can't do all of that. No one can manage all of that. So we really need to ensure that our leadership team are all able to participate in those conversations and to query those beliefs and inspire and be courageous and brave to have those conversations within their own teams and with their staff members. And that's what we're trying to do, is build their capability to also lead this change.
Thank you. Meeting people where they're at, expecting it and planning for it. Absolutely. Anyone else from the panel would like to respond to this question? And then I think we'll start to wrap up.
Oh, I think we both unmuted at exactly the same time, Bridget. I will say just very quickly, I think, you know, the way that we see resistance in particular from the organisations that we work with, we have the, of course, benefit of having a nice piece of legislation to wave in front of people, which goes a long way. It doesn't get you all of the way there, though. But one of the things that, you know, is quite common and really, you know, understandable is the resourcing challenge with doing this work, as I'm sure everyone here is extremely, extremely aware and conscious of. And, you know, that can come from the people who control the purse strings in organisations. So I think what Bridget and Marion have been talking about in terms of getting leaders on board and making them kind of champions for that, and then, you know, where resourcing is needed to help drive the work, that's going to be one of the best ways to overcome that particular form of resourcing related resistance. That is something that, you know, conscious is the big part of a lot of the role of, you know, gender equity officers and similar roles across defined entities who report to us, and really acknowledge the challenge contained within that.
Thank you, Margot. Yes, always an ongoing challenge, our resourcing and budgeting, and how do we make sure that you know, we do budget for the, you know, this work, which we're seeing more and more, which is great. Okay, I'm going to wrap up by asking each of you to tell me in one sentence your top tip. So one sentence top tip for all the participants here today on how to close the pay gap. Margot. Quick ones on the spot.
Okay. Make sure your leaders are in the conversation.
Excellent. Bridget.
You stole mine. Can I say the same? Or maybe second to that, just really do think about a change management approach to the work that you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Marion?
I would concur all of those comments, but I would also say use your data to cement your arguments for change too.
Love it. Rachel?
Intersectionality is key. Look at the experiences of everybody and understand how you can bring everyone along with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to all of our panelists today. Margot Paxman, Bridget Nagel, Marion Wheeler, Rachel Bush, and thank you to the help of Kit McMahon and Fiona in the back end of organising this webinar. Thank you, all of you here today, for being here and taking time out of your busy schedules. We hope you've found it useful. And feel free to reach out if you need support or want to ask questions. And I'm sure the panelists will be happy to answer any specific questions as well after this. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out the recording. We do have a survey that has been, or can be added to the chat. We'd love your feedback on this. So please take time to fill that in. And again, thank you so much. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon.